Okay, so this afternoon shift is toward assessment. And as we talked a little bit about this morning, there are all kinds of quote-unquote tests that students are required to take. And as educators, we are also given assessments and benchmarks, and we're judged on different kinds of student outcomes in terms of the effectiveness of our teaching. So I think, the notion of authenticity within the assessment process is really, really important. One of the challenges with this is that oftentimes the test, and I say that with a wide open, broad definition, tests that students, high stakes testing that students have to take don't always line up with reality. And that is something we have to continue to keep in mind. And understanding that we are constantly faced with the decision of, do we teach to the test because we know the test is important, or do we try to take that leap of faith and teach in a way that gives students the skills and the knowledge that they will need in order to do well on any test that they're faced with related to our content? It's a very, very difficult and challenging question. Okay. So we learned a little bit about content and language objectives this morning, and I thought I would model that for you this afternoon. Our content being the notion of assessment, authentic assessment for students who are learning academic English. So hopefully we're going to unlock this idea of the assessment modification process, maybe having some team conversation, team strategies with some post-instructional assessments that you can use, and also really talking about the bridge between testing, assessments, and grading. Because, wow, that's another process involved in this, another layer. I think that your discussions, I know that your discussions have been so rich and so powerful, and I think you are learning so much from each other that I really want to continue that. The professional dialogue is crucial. We're going to do that in whole group. Obviously, we're going to do it in small groups, and maybe use some really specific adjectives. I'll let you decide what they can be. I won't give you the list. To describe some challenging areas within this process. And we'll do that in the scenario of partners. And then share out this whole group. So those are our objectives for the afternoon. Oops, go back. Let's talk about tests. Why do we have assessments? Because somebody said we're supposed to have something. So what's really the goal? What are the goals of assessments? Yeah. Are the students demonstrating what you intended them to learn? So we're trying to have them really document this through their actions. When I say here the stages of language acquisition, it's kind of twofold, because if the student is an English language learner or an English learner and they're moving from that emerging stage that we discussed a little bit about this morning into the proficient zone, they're going to pass through stages of language development and be able to demonstrate things very differently. But when we also look at native speakers of English, or even Head Start kids, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds versus 18-year-olds in 12th grade, there's a developmental process that students move through to have different stages of academic language acquisition. So that stages of language acquisition means different things in different contexts. And documenting the learning along the way is important for you because you're their teacher. You need to kind of map their pathway. But it's also really important for the students. Why do they need to know about their own progress? Tell me what you're thinking. Why do they need to know? More than a report card. Yes. So they can see their growth. Who cares? Why do they need to see their growth? Yes. Help them set their own goals. How do you work with students who have trouble setting their own goals? What do you do to motivate them? I'm just curious. Give them incentives other than grades or grades? Both? Other than grades? Okay. What else? So when they take field trips, when students take field trips, other than their own reflections, which are, I'm not discounting them at all, those are the most powerful assessments that are available to you. What other kind of assessments can you provide or have you provided for the students? How do you tie it back into the classroom? Okay, the international piece. What about the other? That's great. That's awesome. Awesome. Keep going, Rochelle. I don't even really, I mean, that's a perfect segue into this. The benefits of assessing students through authentic assessments and authentic learning experiences are, I don't even know how, I mean, they're without limits. What are some of the benefits you feel like are there when you have to assess students? What are some of the benefits for you as teachers? What do you get out of that? Yes, they've made it their own. And they're demonstrating the skills and the knowledge and the understanding that you've brought them, not just in your classroom, but they're demonstrating it in other areas of their lives. You have arrived. When they can transfer the information from one place to another, one skill set to another, they have learned. That's awesome. When we think about assessments, one of the most difficult things about development of assessment, sometimes the tests are given to you, but sometimes we have the freedom and flexibility to develop our own, is how do we assess all of the language domains? It's pretty easy to assess writing. We think about that a lot. Write an essay, write a paper, write a letter, write. Reading assessment is usually paired with writing because they're going to read something and then write about it. It's the listening and speaking domains that often fall away, and we don't necessarily think about formally assessing those domains of the language. I'm hoping with our conversation on Thursday about the academic conversations that will somehow maybe shift a little bit, and that you'll develop ways to really tune your ears to listen into when you frame students' conversations to use academic language, that you're going to hear things differently. And they will hear each other differently. And they will be speaking. They'll demonstrate academic language in the oral domain. But I think you have to remember to assess that. Try to notice the difference between a conversation without an academic prompt and a conversation with an academic prompt, and see what your overall takeaways are. Okay. So this notion of post-instructional assessments. This is oftentimes, we know that assessment is an ongoing process throughout the lesson. You're monitoring, you're checking for understanding, you're differentiating as you need to. And then at the end of the lesson, in some cases we have, or at the end of the concept, maybe it's a concept that you've taught over 2 or 3 lessons, we have some kind of summative assessment. So we ask teachers to think about the fact that in some cases, that post-instructional assessment may be, Debbie used a great word, parrot-like in nature, where you've taught them this stuff, and the test is for them to tell it back to you in some way, whether it's a multiple choice test or fill in the blank, even if it's draw a picture, something that tells it back to you. And sometimes it doesn't feel very cognitive in nature. It feels more memorization in nature. Mind you, the more I learn about parrots, the more I think some of them are really thinking. They live to be very old, by the way. I met a parrot in Milwaukee, Wisconsin that was like 75 years old. Yeah. And the parrot had outlived its owner. And apparently when you buy certain kinds of parrots, you have to agree that there will be caregivers for the parrot if the parrot outlives you. Who knew? See? Whole culture within parrots. Owning parrots. Having parrots as a pet. So we want teachers to really think about assessments that involve thinking. Problem solving, problem-based learning. And the thinking about thinking level, the metacognitive level, critical thinking skills. The bag of stuff, here you go, build a filter. That's critical thinking. And then understanding that there's also a sociocultural aspect of assessments that is really necessary. You guys talked about this morning how much you learned from each other, and that there are other teachers in your school that you know you have, if you had more interaction with them, you could learn so much from each other. Kids are the same way. Students are the exact same way. So when we think about having post-instructional assessments, we need to involve that sociocultural element, involve that peer interaction. Now here's the deal. As adult learners, I want you to think about a time in your life when you had to do a group project. Some of you may start to have cringing memories. And the whole group got the same grade. Okay? Talk to each other for a minute about that. Describe to each other a situation where you may have had something like that. Take a few moments and how it didn't necessarily work well. One project, one grade, 5 people in a group, or something like that. Okay. So, excellent dialogue. And it's so, I'm loving it because I have yet, we'll see what happens, to have a workshop where we have different answers, because it's always the same. Everybody talks about group work with one grade, one project, and some of the same issues. So what were some of the things that you guys identified as challenges or dysfunction? That's a great point. And it leads me into the next piece, which is how do we find balance so that there isn't a situation where, because you will always have, I know you guys talked about one person doing all the work, or people's schedules don't jive. You know, I got this going on, I got this going on, and some people don't have a lot of stuff going on. At any rate, how do you find balance to have people communicate about that and not get to a situation where a person is removed who doesn't think that she should be removed? Yeah, right. So here's my next question. Would you rather, if you had to choose between not knowing what to do versus having a role in a project that you weren't necessarily comfortable with, which of the two would you choose? I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing at all versus, ooh, I know I'm supposed to do this, but I'm not really liking it. You got to choose one. Exactly. Most people would prefer, even if it's not something that you love, I don't really want to go to Carowinds, but I know that's my destination, okay, versus I have no idea what we're doing. And then all the backbiting and self-appointed direct dictatorship, direction, whatever you want to call it, all of that occurring. Rather than, going back to Debbie's word of structure, if the professor, he dropped the ball, whoever it was, by when you have people working together, and we're not in an emergency situation where the astronauts are running out of air, you've got to give people structure and you've got to give people roles. And even if they're not thrilled with their role, they will oftentimes, the students will oftentimes live with it and function within that role, knowing that another project is coming and their role will shift. So that's a really key piece about project-based learning, is making sure that every person in the group has a purpose, even if the purpose isn't necessarily like fireworks or verbal. If you have a good sense of who your students are and what they can do, and maybe where they struggle, even if the struggles are outside of school and outside of home, and you know somebody's going to struggle with time management, finding roles for people within an assessment is crucial. The other thing that teachers have done successfully is, yes, there is a group project grade, but you will also be graded on your individual role and how well you follow the framework for that particular role. It doesn't mean that queen of the research, like in Yvonne's group, gets wow, because she didn't even have, that wasn't necessarily even her role. But if your role is to be a facilitator and you've done the best facilitation possible, you're graded on how you're performing your role. And like Catherine was saying, finding a way for the group, because there will always be cases where somebody in the group isn't handling it well. And having some way for the group to come to the teacher, to come to you all and say, you know what, so-and-so, we've done this, we've done this, we've done this, we've tried this. Like, do they have to have given you 5 approaches to solve the problem themselves before you step in? You can tell me that Kareem isn't doing his job, but you got to give me 5 ways that you tried something to help him, and then we'll cross that bridge. And I think then that it does empower the students to know that they still do have a voice to say, Kareem's just not doing it. We've tried. Hopefully, with the 5 student interventions, Kareem will work it out. Okay? Any questions about that before we go on? All right. So everyone has a purpose, or everyone has a role. Yeah, and a purpose. I think the most important piece with helping kids learn how to get along and work it out themselves without some kind of adult swooping in and intervening and you do this and you do this, is to make them understand you are there as an end option. But when you come to me, you have to have tried your own interventions with each other. And you have to be able to tell me what you've done. Yes. Now, there may be instances where somebody gets fired and she doesn't think she should have been fired, where you may have to intervene and say, well, let's talk about what you did. Let's talk about the interventions that you tried. But absolutely. I don't think so. Oops. Got it. It was a mixed set of circumstances. Absolutely. That's great. Do you I was going to say, do you have access to it? I was going to say, if you want to share it with the group, we can put it on Dropbox. Yeah. That'd be awesome. I think you guys would love that. And then you can tweak it. One of my favorite pieces, too, I spent 2 weeks several years ago, back in 2008, in Mexico, in some really rural parts of the central portion of the country. We were not in any resort areas. We were in areas where a large population of the people are actually living in the States with their kids and sending money back to the community, the rural community. And in some cases, the children went with the people who were living in the States, and in some cases they didn't. But the purpose of the trip was to say the ultimate goal is for our economic situation to change to the point where we can sustain people here. And when they come back, these are the kinds of things our schools are doing. We want to know what kinds of things your schools are doing in North Carolina, and how can we blend them so that the learning continues, which I thought was really phenomenal. But my favorite part of that trip was recess. And it wasn't just in one isolated incident. It was culturally the pattern that I saw from school to school. Recess at every single school is unsupervised. The first time I was like, what are you doing? How are you letting up? The teachers go to have lunch together at in a really nice table. They bring their lunch. It's not like the stereotypical teacher's lounge where people are sitting around complaining and backstabbing and They ate together and enjoyed their lunches together, and the kids were outside by themselves playing. And the older kids watched over the younger kids. Right? Yeah, that too. So there are schools like that. It wasn't like that here. Yes. Yeah. Many places. Mm-hmm. It is. And they're very friendly, and they collaborate, and they have a good time together, and they have a peaceful digestive process. It's wonderful. So, nobody's standing up eating. They're all really having a good time. Yes. Absolutely. Yes. Right. Absolutely. Well, and that was my question. I asked the teachers, I said, I come from a very litigious environment, and liability at schools is a very big concern. And so I can't even imagine having an unsupervised recess time. And they all kind of looked at me like, that's horrible. That's so terrible. And the one woman's question to me was, how did the kids learn how to get along? And I didn't have an answer because I'm thinking, dude, I don't think they do learn how to get along. So I said to her, so describe to me, I understand the philosophy behind this. Describe to me how this works. And they have rules, and there's a fence. The school's not wide open. And it's really so that the kids are there and the kids don't, the people on the outside who are supposed to stay on the outside stay on the outside, and the kids are on the inside and they're supposed to stay on the inside. The rule is that the students can only come and get an adult to intervene if a child is hurt. So if somebody fell down by accident and they need medical attention, if somebody is fighting, and oftentimes if there's a fight, unless it's a physical altercation, the rule is the students have to work it out. And they have to negotiate the working it out themselves. And they have to leave school on good terms so that the fight doesn't go out beyond the it's beyond that. You're right. Finding balance. Absolutely. You're right, Debbie. Okay. So, we're going to talk about 3 kinds of post-instructional assessments. One of them is called Analyze, Draw, and Decide. And I'm going to give you some information about this. The other one is called Prediction Timeline. And the third one is Penpal flowcharts. I need you to work in small groups. Each note card has a description of this post-instructional assessment on it. So the first step in your group is for all of you to really take a look at these. And if you want to read them one by one and then change cards, you can. And really think about what the activity involves. The next step is for you to think about the social interaction that would take place with all 3 of these, that sociocultural element, and how important that would be. Okay? So analyze the activities themselves and then look at the sociocultural elements of each of the 3. I'll let you do that in about 6 minutes, maybe 7. You guys are not gonna, you're gonna be the only ones that might like scratch at me in a minute. Sorry. Okay, it won't be too bad. Here's what's gonna happen next. So, this group right here, I want you to just turn your chairs around, they're on wheels, and you're gonna have a conversation with the group behind you. Same thing, you ladies just turn your chairs around, they're on wheels. Share what you guys talked about. I'm gonna ask you guys to wheel down. Don't make us move. Wheel down to Head Start. And share out a few minutes, we'll say 3-4 minutes, what you discussed. And you can tell them it was your least favorite, this was my favorite, this is what we thought, this is what we didn't think, whatever you want to share. And you can stay right where you are, it's totally fine. With the analyze, draw, and decide piece. So, this card. What were some of the ideas that you shared about analyze, draw, and decide? Helping kids and you assessing their collaborative skills. Really important piece. Okay, what about the course of action piece with that? Okay, what else? What other thoughts? How do we get people to decide together about the most beneficial course of action when we're talking about any kind of problem? Coming to a consensus. So here's my question. If we take this skill that we're trying to teach, and the pressure's on Head Start, because if you guys figure it out when they're 3, 4, and 5 years old, when they come to elementary, middle, and high school, they'll be experts. So, Kareem, just saying, we need a little extra here. Coming to a consensus about the most effective course of action. If you pull that out outside the classroom and think about our society, we still as a society struggle with this. And it's not just in the context of education. We struggle with what do we do now at the governmental level, at the neighborhood level. How do we fix this? How do we handle this? And I wonder oftentimes if it's because we haven't really thought about, or we could think more strategically about teaching kids how to solve problems and coming to an agreement with being able to justify why I think this is the most effective course of action. And let's try it. So, really important skills. Doesn't mean it will always work. Because even though we have really good pieces in place at the governmental level with how to determine next steps, what will the course of action be, it doesn't always work. Okay. What do you guys want to tell me about prediction timeline? Any of the other groups want to share? What's going to happen? Yes. That's great. That's a great point. You're awake. You're there. What do you guys want to tell me about Penpal flowcharts? Do you guys want to lead that piece and we'll have... No? Yes? Okay. Okay, well, let's kind of deconstruct this. So the Penpal flowchart, students document the planning process for a writing task or project. Maybe it's in math. Maybe it's not. That's perfect. Yes, absolutely. Students are asked how they should rethink things and make adjustments if needed. So when you have a Penpal, what happens? There's an exchange. In what sense? Usually it's in written form. And usually you're not in the same place. Now that doesn't mean that in the situation of this activity, you're not in the same classroom. You are. But, okay, I can't believe I'm going to ask you to do this on a Monday afternoon. What does a flowchart, when you think of the word flowchart, what concept comes to your mind? Sequencing. Arrows and boxes, yes. And if then, okay? So if you are formulating this flow chart and then you have to write to your Penpal to explain the options, think about the interaction that would occur. The kind of language, but it's in written form. So that makes it a little different than, well, let's discuss this and come up with a consensus. You're going to have to write to your Penpal about some options, if then, and your Penpal, and you're going to probably have to justify some things or explain some things, and then your Penpal is going to have to understand what you've written and write you back with boxes and arrows or deletions. This one is funky, but it can work. And you want to talk about creative thinking? Yes. Especially if you're doing grade level teaming. So maybe one 5th grade class writes to another 5th grade class. I've also seen it work in high school where they have you for math, they have another teacher for science, or another teacher for language arts, and maybe you write to different classes. But it also works fine if you kind of create the Penpal relationship even in the same classroom. They still have to do the writing and the reading. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up, because that's the goal, is how does this fit with the assessment piece? With the sociocultural, the reason I ask you to think about the sociocultural elements, I want you to think another step deeper. How are students learning from each other in any 3 of these? How are they by them interacting, how are they learning from each other? What are they teaching each other? The content? What else? Their thought processes, absolutely. Problem-solving skills. Respecting the opinions of others, even when they don't match yours. What were you saying? Working as a team. Yes, that argumentative, kids love to argue. Say that one more time. Give and take, compromise. Okay, I can live with that, but I'm going to need this. Okay, so one step further, one step deeper. How will this help them? How will they take these skills outside the classroom into the real world?